Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Somebody sent me a card a couple of days ago asking the question with respect to the war in the Ukraine. How do we practice the four Brahmaviharas, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity in the face of these terrible events, this tragic situation? And so I thought I would offer a few reflections on that theme this evening. I feel it's a very good question and very important to consider. Over the years, there have been numbers of occasions where wars have broken out, or great crises of these kinds have happened around the world. In the invasion of Kuwait, and then the destruction of the Twin Towers in New York City, and there's many and various wars and crises of this kind. Human conflicts have happened over the years, and right now we have this particular situation happening and affecting the lives of many people here in Europe and all around the world. We can wonder, and this in the same card that the person wrote to me, the question was, what can we do as a practicing Buddhist? What can we do, or what should we do, or what should we not do? How can we most skillfully relate to a situation, a tragic situation of conflict of this kind? The feelings that arise very naturally. I mean, quite a number of people here have got family members, people close to them who live in that area. In Russia, Ajahn Amaro is in Russia at the moment, also in Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Romania. Yeah. Around that area, there's numbers of us have family members, people who are close to us, people that we know very well, and in the Ukraine also, right in the center of the conflict. So feelings of grief and sadness, feelings of powerlessness or anger, resentment and hatred, negativity, anxiety, very easily, very naturally arise in the face of these kinds of situations. So we, as committed Buddhist practitioners, then we can easily sort of look to the teachings and see, the Buddha's advice is to have loving kindness for all beings. Hatred is never conquered by hatred. Hatred is only ever conquered by love. This is a law ancient and inexhaustible, as it says in the Dhammapada. Or in the Metta Sutta, we recite so often here, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Or with the sharing of blessings. May those who are friendly, indifferent or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life, the highest gods and evil forces. May all beings receive the blessings of my life. So these are very beautiful, very powerful, and very high-minded teachings. And so I feel it's helpful to consider that when we have these principles expounded in the Dhamma teachings, that and this came up in one of the Dhamma readings a day or two ago, that it's expounding a particular ideal, but it's a direction that we set. It's not something to cling to or to grasp. I should be having loving kindness for all beings, those who are perpetrating this sort of destruction and difficulty. I should have as much love for them as I do for other beings, or as I would for my only child. And so it's important to consider that these teachings, they point in a direction. They're describing an ideal attitude. But an ideal is like a Buddha image. It's a kind of a fixed model. It's an ideal, but we start from where we are. We can't start from the ideal. This Buddha image has been sitting there for 20 years and has never moved. Us as human beings, we get aching knees. We have to get up and move. We have bodies that are alive. So an ideal is like a Buddha image, or it's a concept, a mental construction. But it does set a direction. Like we have the Buddha images in the highest place, and it does serve as a model. It sets a direction. It's a way of encapsulating or describing the qualities of peacefulness, or energy, alertness, serenity. So the Buddha image is at the center of attention, but we each start from where we are. We work with the life that we have, these feelings, these bodies, these minds. We start from where we are. We use the ideals, we use these principles to set a direction, but I feel it's most important and most practical and realistic and effective to be starting from where we are, rather than trying to start from the ideal. So what this means is that if we have an ideal, like even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. So hate is never conquered by hatred. We might feel like, oh, well, I'm a bad Buddhist because I'm feeling resentment, or I'm feeling fear, or I'm feeling I'm lost in my own sense of depression or powerlessness. I can't feel that kind of love or appreciation for all beings in a situation like this. And so we take the ideal and then relate to it from a place of self-view, and it turns into a way of judging ourselves, or feeling self-critical, or feeling like I'm a bad Buddhist, or I'm not getting this right, or there's something wrong with me, or I shouldn't be this way. So I'm not reading anybody's mind. I hope I'm not making too many presumptions, but it's often this way that we relate to ideals and principles, and it comes up very often when people ask questions about Dhamma practice. So one of the principles, particularly with loving kindness, that Luang Por Sameda would emphasize over the years, is that rather than feeling like we're supposed to say like every being, or that when we talk about loving kindness, that we're supposed to have a kind of radiant, positive attitude towards every being. He would make a couple of points. One is that loving is not the same as liking. Acceptance is not the same as approval. So that when we're talking about a love for all beings, we're not trying to make ourselves like every being, or like every situation, or like every mind state. We're not being asked to approve of every action, or every mind state, or every being and what they do. But acceptance is rather that openness of heart that recognizes in this moment it's this way. Whether it's something that's beautiful or ugly, painful or pleasant or neutral, then that quality of acceptance is that openness of heart to recognize in this moment it's this way. This is the way it is. And so I feel this is a very important principles to bring to mind. And these are themes that are talked about over and over, but it's easy to forget them. And it's easy for the mind to get lost in anxiety or fear or resentment and aversion or those feelings of powerlessness and grief. When we talk about loving kindness also, another of the aspects that Lumpur Sumedho would emphasize that I found very helpful is rather than trying to climb over your feelings of resentment or irritation or anxiety to get to this loving, boundless heart on the other side, to have a positive attitude towards all beings, he would emphasize it's a matter, more of a matter of having loving kindness for your own resentment, having loving kindness for your own fear, your own aversion, your own anger, your own grief or feelings of powerlessness. Again, not that we're trying to make ourselves like feeling powerless or to like feeling angry or resentful or like feeling anxious, but it's that quality of acceptance, that loving kindness for the state that has arisen, rather than trying to climb over that to get to a positive place on the other side. Loving kindness is actually for this very emotion in this moment, whatever is arising, these feelings of lack or powerlessness or irritation, hatred, to be able to recognize in this moment, here is the feeling of, well, I want to do something but I can't do anything, or I feel so sad, I feel so grief-stricken. What do I do with this feeling of grief? So that in the practice of loving kindness and how we develop the Brahma Viharas, it's to open the heart primarily to what is the felt sense of the experience in this moment. And if there's sadness, to recognize this is the feeling of sadness. If there's anger, then this is the feeling of anger. If there's anxiety and worry, the mind fretting and caught up in feeling stressed and anxious, in this moment, this is what anxiety feels like. This is the feeling of being stressed. It's like this. It's exactly this way. We're not trying to make ourselves like that or pretend that we're glad that it's this way. Acceptance does not mean approval. So we're not trying to sugar things over or to think pink, as Lumpur would put it, but rather, in this moment, here it is. It's exactly like this. And we can do this. It takes quite a bit of mindfulness to, particularly in a very intense and challenging situation of this nature, whether we hear news or people make comments and have opinions, and we can easily get stirred up and carried away by the things that we hear, the things that we see, and we get talked about. So because of strong emotions and a lot of information and news and contact around these different kinds of events and the unfolding of things, we can get easily distracted and caught into the different aspects of it. So it takes quite a bit of mindfulness, but if we see it as essentially important, we see that this is profoundly significant, then we bring moment to moment the quality of open-heartedness and attention to the presently arisen feeling, that whatever it might be. And so that open-heartedness, that recognition of this is the feeling of hatred or the desire for kind of somebody to suffer, that we feel critical of the perpetrators of harm, and the feeling of I want to see those people punished, or and those feelings of anger and negativity. Again, by allowing that in, by recognizing that, you're not approving it, you're not strengthening it, but you're recognizing this is the reaction that's happening in this moment, and it feels this way. And the very act of acknowledging, of accepting that that's what's arisen, then there's the quality of wisdom. Mindfulness and wisdom is able to recognize this is a state. In a way, it's let go of the object, that person or those people, that thing that we're worried about or irritated by or angry about. And it's the recognition is, here is a state that's arisen here. The mind has let go of the content, what the attention's locked onto, and is looking and appreciating and knowing the process of experiencing. So the result of that, there's a bit more space in the heart. There's a bit more, I say, of a capacity to be with what's happening, to attune to it. And out of having that extra space in the heart, there's a bit more clarity and more of an ability to respond to the situations from a place of mindfulness and wisdom, a place of attunement, rather than reactivity. So it's challenging to do that, but if we make the effort to meet each state as it arises and to know it as it is, then when we are feeling what's happening, but also there's less of a quality of being entangled or overwhelmed by the emotions that we feel. There's a processing of them, a receiving and a knowing of them, and then that extra quality of spaciousness in the heart makes it easier to respond in a skillful way. Particularly in a war situation where there's a lot of news, a lot of information every day, there's different things happening, and even in a monastery where we don't have a lot of media contact, still, word spreads and people get to see things and hear things, and information moves through the community, so we can easily be very strongly affected. One of the ways of establishing that quality of attunement and accepting in a radical way the feelings that are here, and without getting caught up in the details or the aspects of individual stories or events, or getting caught up in and identified with particular aspects of it, is to use the physical sensations, the felt sense of an emotional state, so that if anger arises or resentment arises, and that's been noticed, and it can be that acknowledgement, this is the feeling of anger, this is the feeling of resentment or anxiety. Yeah, that's part of it, just knowing what it is and appreciating that. But an extremely helpful tool to use is to feel in the body, where is that grief sitting? I say I'm feeling grief or sadness, I'm feeling helpless. Where in the body is that helpless feeling residing? Feelings of anger or resentment. How does that manifest? Is it a quality of heat? Is there a tension across your shoulders? Is there a weight in the heart? Where is it? How does it feel? So, and I found this, again, an extraordinarily helpful approach, particularly to intense emotional states, because it's so easy for the attention to get drawn into the content, what you're sad about, or what you're enraged about, or what you're worried about, the story that's going on. The mind gets wrapped up in it, and we don't notice what the emotion is, because we're born into it. We've taken full hold of it. We've absorbed into that emotional tone of it. But to feel it in the body, the sensations of the body are much more simple, natural language. So if we're feeling sadness and grief, just to bring the attention to that. Maybe you feel it like an ache in your heart, with no comment, or whether it should be there or shouldn't be there, or when's it going to be over, or I don't want to feel this. To the extent possible, to just let the attention fully rest upon the feelings, the sensation, and just know it as it is. Whether it's tense and hot, or vibrating, or it's heavy, and whatever tone it might be, wherever it might be felt in the body, to consciously cultivate the body awareness as a reference point, as a foundation for awareness. And then that, again, there's an openness of heart to what's being experienced. The mind isn't suppressing it or avoiding it. There's an attunement to what's being felt, and an attunement to the situation. But the mind is not getting drawn into creations about it, not kind of carried away by proliferations and mental activity around that. Rather, it's attuned to this feeling. It knows this feeling, and then the sensations of the body are a very direct, natural, uncomplicated language. This is what anger feels like. It's here in my neck or my shoulders. So this is what anxiety feels like. It's this knot in my stomach. Or this is what sadness, grief feels like. It's this ache in the chest. It's this way. It's like this. And the degree to which it can just be known with an open heart and fully acknowledged, fully received, with no commentary or no kind of why am I feeling this? When's it going to be over? I don't want to be this way. How can I get away from this? To leave as much of that aside, and just to know in this moment it's this feeling, it's this emotion. It feels this way. Then. That again there's a profound recognition of this is a mind state. This is an emotion, a sankhara, a pattern of feeling that has arisen here, and it's like this. And then out of that receptivity, then again there's a greater spaciousness, and the mind, through knowing, through an awakened awareness of those states, there's a bit more room around them. There's a bit more spaciousness around them. We can respond to situations in a conversation that we're having with someone, or hearing a piece of information. We're not immediately grabbing hold of it and jumping in and getting lost in opinions or reactions or agitation around that. But we're able to let those waves of feeling flow through us and be known. And if there's something to be done or said, then that's useful, then we can say it or do it. If there's nothing to be done or said, then we can leave it alone. Also, part of working with these situations, and I found over time these different crises that have moved through our world and our society at different times. It's to bring attention to the process of conceptual proliferation, papancha, is also a major part of this, because it's so easy, as I was already saying, how the mind, you hear some news, or somebody makes a comment, or we see an image, or we get a message from someone who's in the thick of things, in the Ukraine, or in our family, and somewhere close by, or people that we know. And the mind immediately gets drawn into its story-making factory. It gets going with a conceptual proliferation. One thought leads to another, to another, to another, to another, to another, and the mind gets lost in its own creations. So to be aware of the process of conceptual proliferation, and to see if there's a quality of attention, a caring, mindful attention, we can see how that happens, and we can use this as an opportunity to train the mind not to get lost in that. It's also interesting if you look at one of the key teachings in the suttas about conceptual proliferation, in Mahakachana's explanation, and the Buddha confirms this. He says it's on account of conceptual proliferation, papancha. This is what causes people to quarrel, to argue, to fight with each other. It's through the mind getting lost in its own creations. This is why people take up weapons and attack each other, why there are quarrels, why there is conflict in the world. So the very reason for warfare, one of the main contributing causes, is people getting lost in their own thoughts, their own opinions, their views, buying into them, and then the belief in those opinions, and then those opinions, those views, then clashing with others, or not meshing with the views and opinions, the concerns, the needs of others, and then you have a fight, you have an argument, or in the current situation, you have a whole war going on that affects the lives of millions and millions of people. So that I feel it's significant that in that sutta that conceptual proliferation isn't just an internal matter. It's not just having a lot of chatter in the mind, that it would be good if it went a bit more quiet and there was more peace internally. Right there in that teaching, it points out it's because of our minds running on these strings of associative thought and the tendency to believe in those, get lost in those. That's why we clash with each other. That's why we get into arguments, both on a national level or on a more local level, just within the monastery, within the people that you share a building with, the people that you work together with in our living situation. This is where conflict, struggle, quarrels and arguments come from, is getting lost in our own mental creations, and then those creations clashing or not harmonizing with the preoccupations and the opinions and views of those around us. So, when my world doesn't match your world, and if I object to the way you see the world, then we find ourselves in a fight. This is a cause of conflict. So one of the things that we can do with our lives and our minds is to understand how that proliferative process works, and to train our mind not to do that. And that has a beneficial effect both for us as individuals, being able to have a mind that is more peaceful and calm and attuned to the present, and also it helps us to attune, to get along with other beings, to be not so reactive, and not to clash, not to quarrel with other people and with the world, because if we're not so attached or identified with the thoughts and feelings that go through our mind, we know them more just as, this is an opinion, this is a thought, this is a point of view, then if we can look at these views and opinions with a greater objectivity, then we can relate to those of other people, other beings, in a similar way. We can not be so reactive. We can be more spacious around the views and opinions others have, and it is much less likely to lead to quarrel and to conflict, to struggle between us. So that in terms of our practice, then if you're seeing that your mind is getting drawn in a particular pattern, like worrying about a particular group of people in your family, or getting resentful about these different political figures, or the mind locking onto certain issues about how the refugee situation should be taken care of, or how aid should be given, or how the conflict could best be resolved, or whatever it might be, to use the formal practice to, first of all, to know the emotions that arise, to know them in the body, to feel them, to acknowledge them just as physical sensations, and to know the tone, the quality of that, but also to watch the proliferative process, the conceptual proliferation. If you see there's a particular issue that sets you off, like your family, or the political figures who are leading the conflict, or the way of handling the refugee situation, or whether it's going to escalate into more widespread and dangerous conflict, and more countries are going to get involved. To see where your mind is going, to where the tracks it chooses to go down, and to use the formal practice to look at that, so that if you know that you're triggered by a particular worry or by a particular aversion, when you sit down to meditate here in the temple, or in your room, or in the kuti, or on the walking meditation path, to deliberately bring to mind that area that you get lost in, you get caught up in, that not to create more confusion and agitation in the mind, but rather to know, well, that's an area where my mind gets lost. That's a very well-worn track that my mind likes to go down. Okay, so let's watch that happen. Let's see how that works. And when there's a deliberate, conscious choice to explore, to look at those particular habits that you get drawn into desire, or fear, or aversion, or anxiety, sadness, and depression or grief. So it may seem unhelpful, but you can consciously use an exercise to trigger that emotional reaction. To bring up a key word, like thinking of the name of a political figure, or the refugees, or escalation, and watch what the mind does to know. Okay, I've invited this in. I've dropped in that key word. I've let the mind be going in that particular direction. Let's watch how it goes. Let's watch how that associative string of thoughts gets formed. And then, because you've done that deliberately, you've consciously seeded that train of thought, then there's a greater sense of clarity. It's not just risen randomly, or because of a conversation, or because you weren't really paying attention. You've deliberately invited it in, so you can see how the process unfolds. And then after a minute or two, having seen how the mind gets lost in that, to say, okay, well, let's follow that back, to replay the strings of thoughts wherever it has ended up. Follow it back to it started off with me thinking the word the refugee crisis, or thinking of the word escalation, or thinking of the terrible sadness, this aching grief. That's where it began. It just began with that particular point, that particular formation. That's where it began. And then the mind ran with it and got lost in it. So we get familiar with the process of conceptual proliferation. We see how it works. And then through seeing how that works, and as it starts to launch and the mind gets drawn down one of those tracks, we know it. It's a well-known habit by seeing the habit in operation, seeing how it functions, then we're much more able to not get drawn into it, not to get lost in it. In one of the stories of the Dhammapada commentary, I think it's where the Dhammapada verses that goes mean thoughts, trivial thoughts, come confusing the mind, and the mind chases after them. I can't remember the precise verse itself, but mean thoughts, trivial thoughts, confusing the mind and letting it get carried away. The commentary on that verse tells a story of a young novice who was given the job of fanning his uncle, who was a Mahatera, and his uncle was a monk and giving a Dhamma talk. And these the ceremonial fans are not just ceremonial, but that was a kind of in ancient times, or even pre-electrical times in Thailand, that was the cooling system. And you have even in the Vinaya, there's descriptions of how you carry out the fanning. One stroke down and then one stroke across. One stroke down, then one stroke across the other way, to cool down the elder and to keep the mosquitoes away. So his uncle was giving a Dhamma talk, and his nephew, the young novice, was given the job of fanning his uncle, the Mahatera. And it describes how during the course of this Dhamma talk, the novice gets a bit distracted and his mind starts to wander and thinking, oh, well, I've been a novice for several years now, and I don't really think the monastic life is for me. And once we get to the end of the rains retreat, I think I'll go back to the lay life and go back to the village. And there was that girl who was. She said she'd wait for me if I ever come out of the robes, and so she'll probably be there, and that would be really nice to we get together and we can get married, and then we'll have a little house on the edge of the village in our own fields, and a few goats, but then but she's from a different village, so if she gets pregnant, then she'd probably want to go to her home village to have the baby, and how would we manage that? So she's pregnant, and then we'd probably have to take the goats with us as well, and so they're really difficult. They really misbehave, and so as we're going along the road, then we have to be. She's pregnant, so I'd have to look after the goats and keep them in check, and then they're always going all over the place. They're so disobedient, and they kind of race off the path and drop down in the ditch, and you have to kind of whack them with a stick. And then suddenly he hears this voice saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he comes to, and he realizes he was whacking his uncle, the Mahatera, with the fan, mistaking his uncle for the goat. And sorry. So that's you can find it in the Dhammapada commentary if you're interested. But papancha is not a new thing. There are ancient times we can easily get lost in these patterns of creation. But I feel that it's particularly when things are very ramped up and emotions are very strong and anxiety can be high and feelings of aversion and fear and sadness can be very, very strong. It's almost more important to get to know how papancha works and to see that it's a habit of mind and it doesn't have to be followed. And just to see how the mind gets drawn into particular patterns. And then when you've seen that, having got lost, with chasing the goats or whatever it might be, that where did that begin? Oh, it began with that thought. It's just that thought, maybe at the end of the rains I'll go back to lay life, or maybe the war will escalate, or how will we look after all these refugees? That way you see a picture, you hear some news, someone makes a comment, you get an email from someone nearby in the war zone, and it's not that you're trying to not feel anything. We're not trying to harden our hearts or make ourselves desensitized, but in a mysterious way, what we're doing is helping the heart to be more open, more responsive, more attuned to the time, the place, the situation. Because the more our mind is lost in conceptual proliferation and absorbed in that, the less attuned we are to the actual reality. We're lost in our own little self-created world. That's what happens. That's why we get into conflicts. So that for the mind that is letting go of papancha, the nipapancha, free of that conceptual proliferation, it's not a matter of not caring or trying to switch off our feelings or our thoughts altogether, but it's keeping an open mental space. It's helping the heart to be responsive rather than reactive, to be noticing and to be aware of the time, the place, the situation, and to be attuned to that. And so, as I said, what we find that if there's something useful for us to say, we say it. If there's nothing useful for us to say, we stay quiet. If there's something we can do, then we do it. If there's nothing we can do, then we leave things alone. So that in that way, what we're doing is to take the painfulness of a situation like this, to be acknowledging that, and to say, be ready to know those painful feelings, but to recognize that we don't have to escape from that kind of dukkha. The dukkha that is the ending of suffering is not never having any physical pain or emotional pain, but rather it's the mind freeing itself from creating agitation and complication around the flow of life. And also, in that lack of proliferation, that nipapancha, one of the things that is part of that is that we're not creating each other. We're not creating fixed opinions or fixed judgments about each other. Because one of the causes of conflict in the monastery, in the home, in the workplace, or between nations, is that we can easily demonize each other. The other becomes the source of all wrongness and badness, and that's when there are wars. This is easily what happens, that one nation will demonize another. That all those people, well, they're not really people. They're kind of they're monsters, or they're demons, or they're bad people, and that they are. Sort of a group perception is cultivated that the other is really bad and wrong, and it so dehumanizes. We get drawn into those judgments and perceptions, and the mind believes in those judgments. So part of what we can offer, and what's beneficial for us as individuals, and is also, I would say, very beneficial for society, is to not get drawn into that demonizing process, blaming the other, or saying that all the wrongness is over there. That's all, that lot, they're bad, they're evil, they're all wrong. But rather to recognize when you're getting those kind of signals, or people make those sort of comments, or that comes across, to say, well, I don't condone the actions that those people are doing. The people are behaving in destructive, harmful ways, but they are people. We're all human beings together, sharing this life. And so that refusal to dehumanize other people, but to continue to recognize the humanity that we share. And that is one of the reasons why in the sharing of blessings, we share the blessings of our life with those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile. We share the blessings of our life with the highest gods and evil forces, Brahma, Maharaja, Indacha. We share the blessings of our life with the forces of evil. And it's not because we want them to be doing more evil, destructive, and hurtful things, but rather we are recognizing that this is another living being. Their actions are reprehensible and harmful, egregious, destructive. So we're not condoning the action, but we're refusing to hate the being. As it said in the Dhammapada, hatred is only ever conquered by love. Hatred is never conquered by hatred. More aversion, more hatred is only going to make things worse. So we are, in that respect, I feel one of the things within our own minds, our own hearts, and in our conversations, and what we bring to the world is a refusal to hate, a refusal to demonize and to condemn the other, but to instead recognize that I might not approve or condone that person's actions, but I'm not going to hate them. That we can be kind to that which is not likable, even that which is destructive. We also, that doesn't mean that we're necessarily passive or don't take action. Don't say raise our voices to say that's unskillful, that's unwholesome. The precepts, Panatipata Viramani. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living being. That's say we have our own standards of respect for life, but we because someone else is engaged in killing and destruction, we don't have to hate them on account of that. We're not approving of that. We're not saying that it's okay, but we're recognizing that's unskillful, that's harmful, that's destructive, that brings misery along with it. But we are not making that a cause for hatred or for greater division. So what we're doing in that is we're speaking to that which is noble within the hearts of other beings. That sense of refusal to hate and refusal to create another being as other, as somehow separate, in an absolute way. We are reaching that in them which is noble, which is wise, which is skillful. It might be buried under many, many layers of opinion and reactivity and unskillful action, but it's there. Like the Buddha, when he met Angulimala, who was a mass murderer and bandit, he could see that, yes, this man's behaved in incredibly destructive, harmful ways, killed hundreds of people, but that being is not just a destructive action, it's not just unskillfulness, there is other dimensions to that being. And so the Buddha addressed those qualities that were there in Angulimala, and Angulimala ended up becoming an arahant. Of course, it doesn't happen with every unskillful being who's being so caught up in unskillful action. But I do feel it's an important principle, and something that both Luang Por Chah, Luang Por Sumedho, the teachers I've lived closest to over the years, have been extraordinarily skilled at. Just not judging a person simply by a set of behaviors or attitudes, but being able to look past that and to see that even if someone's got really unskillful habits, there's a good heart underneath there. There's other dimensions of their being to be considered, to not overlook. And I feel the more that we can remember our common humanity, the more that we can come from that place of non-aversion, non-hatred, then that's something that we can contribute. That's something that we can, just in the conversations that we have, the people that we're connected with, the communications that we have, that making that clear distinction within our hearts is that I might disapprove of your actions and see that as really unskillful, destructive and harmful, but I refuse to hate you. I will not make you other. I will not demonize you. And that in a strange way, when we are able to respect our common humanity, or our relationship with each other as living beings, then that gives the other some greater space to not be following their destructive habits, and to if we are disapproving and filled with aversion and hatred and fear, then if we put that out, then others that we meet or that we communicate with, then they also react with aversion and fear and hatred, and you have greater division, greater conflict, greater separation. If instead there's a respectfulness, a recognition of our commonality as living beings, sentient beings, and there's a respect for that relatedness, even if it might be rejected to some degree, there's something that also recognizes the commonality, what we have as a shared life together, and that has its effect in some way, shape, or form. I would suggest, in my own experience, that's how it works. That if we speak to that, if we address that, if we relate to that, then it can help to bring out the best in others. Again, we're not condoning their actions, we're not ignoring the unskillful actions, but there's like the Buddha relating to Angulimala, he was prepared to recognize, yes, this person's behaved in incredibly harmful, destructive, cruel, foolish ways, but that's not all that this being is. There's other dimensions to this being, and if that's what is addressed and respected, then that can rise up, and that can be what sets a new direction for that life. Many years ago, I met Air Chief Marshal Constantine. I had an operation at the RAF Halton Hospital. I had a weird, I had a lymph gland in my neck that died and decomposed. So I had this weird lump on my neck, and the local doctors didn't know what to do with it, so they sent me to RAF Halton, which is where they sent weird cases to be treated. And I was in the hospital for 4 or 5 days after the operation, and I'd seen this elderly gentleman on the ward, and we hadn't talked, but I'd had my operation, I was fixed up and was waiting for the Amaravati van to come and pick me up. And he approached me as I was sitting in the lounge just outside the ward, and he said, "May I talk to you?" And he was a great, white-haired elderly man. And I said, "Yes, of course." And he told me his life story. And he was the second in command of the RAF at the end of his career, the Royal Air Force. During the Second World War, he was in bomber command. He was one of the highest-ranking people in the bomber squadrons. And he described how he joined the Air Force when he was young because he came from a poor family, and he'd wanted to see the world, and the best way to see the world was to learn how to fly. And the only way he could learn how to fly for free was to join the Air Force. He said he was so clueless about the military side of things that in the 1930s he said to his commanding officer, "Sir, we're a fighter squadron. Who are we supposed to be fighting? We're not at war with anybody at the moment, but who are the enemy? The next enemy we're likely to be fighting?" And his commanding officer said, "The French, of course. Haven't had a war with them for quite a while." So he had no idea of the war that was coming with Germany, and so he came into the whole thing very innocently, very naively. Once the Second World War began, he showed an ability as a leader, and he got promoted very, very quickly. So he was the youngest Air Vice Marshal in the RAF, and he was eventually became responsible for many bombing raids over Germany. And so we were sitting together in the hospital sort of lounge, and he was just unfolding this whole story of how things had taken shape for him. So from this sort of naive teenager coming into the Air Force, he found himself organizing these bombing raids. He said he organized the first 1,000-bomber raid over Germany. He was responsible for the raid on Dresden, which is caused the destruction of thousands and thousands of lives. And he said that raid on Dresden has been heavily criticized over the years as being a war crime or that was very blameworthy. He said all they got was a telegram from number 10 Downing Street that just said Dresden maximum impact. So that was it. So so there was a strange kind of confessional quality that he had in telling me this whole. I'm this sort of young Buddhist monk, doesn't know, he'd never met before, some sort of religious figure from a religion he didn't know much about. But it was very touching because you could see each step of the way, each step made sense, but suddenly he is responsible for this destruction of thousands and thousands of lives in terrible bombing raids. But then he said after the war finished, he was still so young. He was only 35 when the war ended, and he said they didn't know what to do with me, so they started taking stripes off again. They kind of tend to demote him because he was too high a rank for the age he was. And so he said they didn't know what to do with me. So he said I took a plane and I flew to every single place that I bombed. So it took me 2 years. He went to every city, every town in Germany that he'd organized bombing raids for. He said at the end of that time, he said, I made a vow, a resolution, I would give the rest of my life to making sure this never happens again. And so I tell the story because he was a person who's drawn into a massive amount of unskillful action. But each step of the way made sense, but then he found himself engaged in this incredible degree of harm, destructive activity, responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. But the result of that, I'm not saying he was an arahant or a great sort of spiritual being, but that was his resolution, was that he was going to work for the rest of his life to the extent he was able to help prevent any further wars, and to do what he could with his career and his life to find peaceful resolutions and to give to make his life one committed to the ending of war and to finding ways of resolving conflicts in peaceful ways. And at that time, which was 1987, he said, this is the longest period of peace in Europe that we've had in the history of Europe, 40 years of non-conflict. So he was, obviously, in the middle of a tragic war now, but it was a powerful conversation. It was very, had a significant impact on me, because I could see he was someone who was essentially a good-hearted person who got drawn into extraordinarily unskillful activity, and that was on his mind. And I think one of the reasons why he wanted to sit down with a religious figure and to spill it all out, to describe it all. But then having recognized how unskillful, how destructive his actions were, to take the pain of that, the recognition of that unwholesomeness, and to use that pain as a kind of motivation to do what that he was able to do within the sphere of his life. As he said, I want to give my life to making sure this never happens again, and so that. It had a big effect on me, because I always tended to be quite critical, automatically critical, or judgmental, or make generalizations about people involved in warlike activity. And I realized I'd forgotten that there's people have their stories, and people who are involved in these things, they have a background, and that I'm not condoning that in any way, shape, or form, but it made me realize that it's so important to see the humanity of each other, and to not judge too quickly, but to remember to relate to that human quality, that spiritual dimension, and that the degree to which that can be respected and kept alive and encouraged. And that's what enables people who have been involved in really egregious and harmful, destructive behaviors, how that can, that doesn't have to be something that they are solely defined by, but they can recognize that given the right conditions, and they can rise up out of that and help to contribute to the alternative, to say solving our disagreements in peaceful ways, and dealing with our differences of opinion and our different perspectives, working with those in a much more humane, skillful, and peaceful way. So I offer these thoughts for consideration this evening.